Hello. Today's micro lesson is going to be about code speak. You are going to be looking at the Internal Revenue Code, and it is not what I'd call the best drafted document I've ever viewed. Okay, there's a lot of language in there that's very technical, but it is also very predictable if you know what to look for. So this lesson is going to be on how to read the code. Now, I'm going to start by saying that language matters, as we know. We're lawyers, and the law relies on words and on wordsmiths to be able to figure out what the law says. Statutory interpretation is key in code-based courses like tax and bankruptcy. So you have to be able to wade through statutes like this. And if nothing else, my goal for you in this class is maybe to help you become a better reader, a better person who can read statute and interpretation. So develop your statute reading skills. When we look at what we're going to do in this particular course, we have to be able to understand that some of the words that are used in the statute don't follow regular English conventions. And I'm not just saying that because English has become a lot more informal in the last 20 or so years, but because it has a particular convention all its own. So let's look at some of the things in the code that can illustrate this language for you. Okay, first of all, the code uses a lot of general language, and I'm going to give you the example of code section 61. It's a general definition, except as otherwise provided in the subtitle. Gross income means all income from whatever source derived, including but not limited to the following. Okay, that's considered a very general definition. Okay, and not just because in section A, in subsection A, it says general definition. General definition is not something that you should look as a key to whether or not something is a general versus specific provision. This is general because it is something that is a statement, but that you can possibly take to be, it's going to be overridden elsewhere by the language, such as by specific language. Specific language ties directly to something precisely. It doesn't leave wiggle room like we saw in the previous one, except as otherwise provided, all income, including but not limited to general. Here's specific language. See, 102A starts with general rule, which is why I caution you not to use general rule as a indicator of this being general versus specific. But it does mean that it starts with an opening proposition where you can have some changes to it in further subsections or subparagraphs. Okay, so, or in paragraphs, not subparagraphs. So the general rule here is gross income does not include the value of property acquired by gift, bequest, devise, or inheritance. That's very specific. If you were to think about it as specific language, does specific overrule general? If you were to say, okay, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, when I get a gift from somebody, is it income? We have a section that says all income, whatever source derived, and then we have one saying it does not include the value of property acquired by gift. And if you had to think about this, I'm pretty sure you came up with the right answer, that a specific provision trumps the language of a general provision, which means that in a given situation, it will be what rules. Okay, so we also have to look for conjunctive versus disjunctive language in the code. This is probably hearkening you back to LARW, which I'm going to guess is a good thing. But conjunctive language requires that everything that's listed needs to be met in order for the particular rule or provision that it's listed in to apply. And this is signaled by the use of the word and after the next to last item in the list, so the second last item. Yeah. Whereas disjunctive is a list that is given, and only one of the things in the list has to be present in order for whatever it's claiming to be true or to be applicable. And that is signaled by the use of the word "or" after the next to last item in the list. So here's an example. Section 121, is this a conjunctive or disjunctive use? I've got the little arrow down here where we talk about the principal residence exclusion. And it says that married filing jointly will have a joint exclusion of $500,000 if, and there's three things: either spouse meets the ownership requirements, both spouses have to use the use, and neither spouse is ineligible. So what it's telling us here, this is conjunctive. It has to have all three things met in order for the $500,000 limitation to apply. Versus, we'll go to 1H11C, where we look at the definition of a qualified foreign corporation, which is applicable for qualified dividend income treatment. It shows us that here's a outline of it. It's a foreign corporation if it's incorporated in a possession of the U.S. or such corporation is eligible for the benefits of a comprehensive tax treaty. So it can be either a U.S. possession or it can be from a country that has a tax treaty with the U.S. So there we have a disjunctive example. Okay. The phrase "for the purposes of," when we see it in the code, this is a bit of a red flag. Okay. It's telling us that something is going to be used for a specific purpose, for the purposes of. But it is important for you to understand that there are boundaries that are set by this phrase. Is it for the purposes of the subtitle, which would be the entirety of the Internal Revenue Code, for purposes of this section or this paragraph or the subsection? Know the boundaries that are being set here. And what you're seeing will apply only to the things within that boundary. Okay, for example, for purposes of this subsection, the term North America means the U.S., its possessions, the Pacific Islands, and Canada and Mexico. This is also often a red flag that this is something that might not be true outside of the boundaries that you're setting. For example, North America. We know that the U.S. is in North America. We know that Canada is in North America. We also know that Mexico is in North America. But from a geography perspective, these are not actually the exclusive countries in North America. In fact, if you look at other sources, it'll show you the up-to-date list of countries in North America. It includes Nicaragua, Panama, St. Kitts and Nevis, Jamaica, Dominican Republic, Costa Rica, Belize, Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago. There's a whole list of countries. The Caribbean countries are geographically part of North America. But for the purposes of this subsection, North America means the U.S., its possessions, Canada, and Mexico. It leaves out a lot of things. So you need to understand, and by the way, there's also dependent territories. So look at the size of North America. It's not 3 countries. But the phrase "for the purposes of" can also tell you that there's a little bit of a deviation from reality here, but for the purposes of this subsection, the sky is green, and you're like, okay, the sky is green. Okay, which is never a good sign in Topeka because that generally means it's tornado weather, but I digress. The phrase "except as otherwise provided" is, I call it a neon light that, there might be something else directly on point here, so don't rely specifically. You found this provision, yay, but don't stop here. Make sure that there isn't something else that's more directly on point, i.e. this might not be the last word. So I'm looking at section 61 again. We have the general definition, and the first thing it says is "except as otherwise provided" in this subtitle. So anywhere else in the Internal Revenue Code, gross income means, and it gives the definition. But it leaves it wide open for you to understand that there are other things that refine this definition. This is not the last word. Oh, the phrase notwithstanding any other provision, this is a fun one. It's basically what I consider statutory throwdown. Oh, yeah. It alerts you that this particular provision is the law. And I know everything's the law, but it's the final word. It's the final word on that precise topic, and there is absolutely nothing else that can trump it or in any way alter what is being said in that particular statutory language. And so it's hardcore. Notwithstanding any other provision, this is what reality is. Like, okay. And we see this, for example, I use section 1245A1 as the example for this, where it deals of adjusted basis. You see, such gain shall be recognized notwithstanding any other provision. So it's telling you that you're going to recognize it even if something else says you should, you're going to. Okay. Language, mandatory versus elective. When we look at what's the difference between mandatory, well, you have to have it. That's what's going to happen. Mandatory, it has to be done. And that is often cued in the statute that we're looking at by the use of the word shall. Elective is generally cued by either the use of at the election of the taxpayer as a phrase or may. Typically may at the election of the taxpayer, they go together. But you'll want to see, is this something that automatically happens or has to happen, or is this something that the taxpayer may elect to happen? And you'll also want to know in practice that if it's something they may elect to happen, you might want to actually do the election that makes it happen, because otherwise it doesn't magically happen. Okay, the phrase treated as or considered, it's basically a game of let's pretend. Okay, for the purposes that it's looking at, we're going to pretend that this is the way it is. Generally speaking, when you have, we're going to look at 1223.9, when we're looking at holding period and whether or not something is a long-term or short-term capital gain, don't worry, you don't have to know these phrases yet. Then it's telling you that, yeah, this doesn't meet the requirements that it usually would, but we'll consider them to have done it. We'll consider them to have held property for more than a year, even if they sell it the day after they inherit it. Okay. The ever lovely including but not limited to phrase, it basically is nothing more than a cue that this is not an exhaustive list. Okay, it's giving you illustrative examples. It is something that if you're on it, great, you're definitely caught by it, but you shouldn't actually ever hope to make an argument in front of a judge that says, well, I wasn't on the list. That's not going to work. Including but not limited to, very general language, and it's not something that you would ever bring up in court as being the reason why your client's behavior or whatever it's not included on the list. They are just meant to be examples. Once again, using section 61, general definition, it gives a list and it says including but not limited to the following items, and then it gives a laundry list of things that are included in the definition of income. So again, it's not persuasive when you're trying to argue in court that the item of income isn't on the list, so it's not income. It just doesn't work that way. Okay. However, the phrase but does not include when we're dealing with lists, that is specific exceptions which are exclusive. Okay. So if you're on that particular list, you're golden. And I'm giving you the example of section 1221 when we're trying to determine what the definition is for a capital asset, stock in trade, or something in inventory. That is exclusive. That is specific. It's not included in the definition of capital asset. Hardcore. Full stop. Okay, the phrase allowed versus allowable. When a taxpayer actually takes a deduction and is proper and appropriate, they've been allowed the deduction. So it is after they've done it. When a taxpayer could take a deduction but hasn't, and that might be a hasn't yet, that is referred to as allowable. Yes, it's an allowable deduction. Oh, okay. That means I could take it. So what is the key to the language here? I've had a lot of students that want to just rip through it like they were reading, a casebook. Statutory language takes time to absorb because it's dense and it's awkward. And frankly, you are learning a second language, or third or fourth, depending on who you are. You're learning another language. Just because it looks like it's in English, it doesn't mean it actually is. And the conventions that we have for statutory interpretation are not the exact same conventions we would use for spoken or regular written English. So, if anything, I can take your time, reread it, read it over again. Don't be afraid to be slow. It doesn't mean that you're not getting it. It means that you need time to absorb it, and that's okay. Okay, the last little part of interpretation that I'm going to point out here is when we're dealing with mathematical concepts. Yes, I know many of you just died inwardly inside when I said math. There's going to be a little bit of math. There's not going to be a lot in this class. It's going to be basic addition, subtraction, a little bit of division, a little bit of multiplication, and it's all very easy. You can use a calculator. And now that I have a daughter in middle school, and I can assure you that this is like third to fourth grade math. So addition is not signaled by the use of the word and. And in the code means there's something conjunctive happening. Okay. Addition is signaled by the sum of something plus something. So the phrase, the sum of x plus y. Subtraction is even worse when it comes to awkward phrasing. It's indicated by the excess of x over y. And this is absolutely unfortunate because the word over in the mathematical concept usually triggers somebody to think that there is division. It is not. It is subtraction. The excess of x over y is your signal for a subtraction to take place. Multiplication is easy. Okay? It merely says multiplied by. Something shall be multiplied by. That's not hard language. But code ratio, which is also generally how we think of division, it will be indicated by an amount which bears the same ratio to x as y bears to z. And here is an example of a section where we find code ratio. 121b5b, where we look at periods of non-qualified use of principal residence. Gain shall be allocated to periods of non-qualified use based on the ratio which the aggregate periods of non-qualified use was owned bears to the period they were owned. So what we're doing is we're trying to figure out a fraction here, which is division. So if you own the property for 10 years and you had 2 years for non-qualified use, the ratio is 2 over 5, so you would multiply the gain by 2/5. So yes, ratios are fun. And limiting devices. Limiting devices are merely language in the code which tells you that there is either a floor before something can apply or a ceiling so that you can only apply up to a certain level. And these are usually indicated by phrasing such as the greater of, or the lesser of, or the lower of, which I hate when they say the lower of, it's the lesser of. But look at 1211b. It tells you that you can take a loss from a capital loss up to $3,000 or the excess of losses over gains. So the lower of will be added to the amount of deduction that you can get. All right, and that is it for my Code Speak lesson. Again, don't be afraid to take your time reading the code. I try not to actually assign a ton of reading because I want you to engage with reading the code sections. Don't skim through it. That doesn't help you. Law school is a safe space for you to actually develop these skills because you want to hit the ground running in practice. You want to be able to read this stuff in practice. You don't want to get up to speed when you hit practice. You want to do it before you get there because you're going to be really busy when you start practice. You should be positioning yourself to be in the best possible best possible position to hit the ground running when you leave here is what I think I'm trying to say. So engage with the actual code sections. Read it over and over. Mark it up. Figure it out. Wrestle with it. Try to grapple with the meaning and make sure that you are comprehending how it fits together. Anyway, thank you very much, and take care.